Well, hello, everybody. For those that don't know me, which is probably everybody, because I haven't spent much time on Clubhouse nor in the social arenas. My name is Rod.
Despite your illustrious handle.
Despite my illustrious handle, that is true. I have the Bitcoin handle here on Clubhouse, which I think this is the second time, to be honest with you, I've used, actually third time I've used Clubhouse. Back in the day, I chatted with Will from Fold. But yes, I do have the illustrious handle Bitcoin here on Clubhouse. And my name is Rod. I go by the handle BitKite on Twitter. And like many, I started a podcast, podcast about Bitcoin, and specifically a podcast about the people who bring Bitcoin to life. And I think, Sid, you were episode number 5. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. And you were kind enough and I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee, here at Bitcoin Park, which I'll do a shameless plug to everyone who's listening. If you're in the Nashville area, please come and visit. You can check us out on meetup.com/Bitcoin Park. And come and stop by.
Can I add to that?
Yes, you may.
If you're not in the Nashville area, go to Nashville and go to Bitcoin Park because it is worth it.
That's true. I appreciate that plug. Yeah, we do meetups, workshops, events on a pretty regular cadence. And we're going to ratchet it up here in 2023. My partner on this crazy Bitcoin Park project, Matt Odell, he and I were catching up this morning, and we were talking through a number of different ideas that we're going to manifest and bring to light. One of which is, just to give a tease, is the Nashville Energy and Mining Summit, January 12 and 13. So if you're into Bitcoin mining and energy and the state of Tennessee, you'll want to come and check us out. But now let me further expand on what the point of this post-show recap. So I do this podcast. It's called Builders in Bitcoin. And again, I'm very fortunate over the last number of years to meet some amazing entrepreneurs, creators, and people working in the Bitcoin space and living in the Bitcoin space. And with the podcast, I spent about an hour just talking about Bitcoin and selfishly all the questions that I want answered. Undoubtedly, there's a number of questions or things that I wanted to touch on, or the guest may have wanted to touch on, which we undoubtedly missed, maybe misspoke, or wanted to clarify. So that's the point of this show, and then we're going to be recording this again. Sid, we'll spend about, let's say, 30 minutes or so talking about the episode number 5. So if you're on any podcasting app, you can search Builders in Bitcoin. And if you want to subscribe or save that podcast, if you haven't listened to it already, I highly recommend that because it was a great rip. Sid and I talked about his journey and his tour across America, a number of the stops he made and the people he met, and some specific stories at each of those locales, which were great. And Sid, I'll let you explain your quick background on the tour, but I do wanted to jump into one thing you said that stuck with me post-show that I wish I had you expand on, which was, when we were talking about meeting Bitcoin meetup organizers and what was the feeling amongst them, or what was kind of the common denominator, you mentioned, and I'll paraphrase, they were about doing greater than dooming. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I can kind of tie this into the motivation behind the whole tour. So I've been living outside of the country, outside of the US. I'm American, but I've been living outside of the US for a couple of years now. And I wanted to come back to the US and kind of soak in American culture again, meet Americans, hang out, and see what's going on with the Bitcoin community, because there's this in-person Bitcoin community that's popped up and appeared really in the last 2 years since I've been gone. So I wanted to go to Bitcoin meetups and see what it was all about, because all of my interaction with the Bitcoin community pretty much has been through Twitter for the last 2 years. And Twitter and the internet are a very interesting medium, especially watching everything that happened at the beginning and middle of 2020, like summer of 2020. Remember, I would wake up and there's palm trees outside and nice weather, and then I'd open Twitter and see the police beating people in the streets in some major American city. And it
Mhm.
was just this weird, like I got these snippets of the most violent, worst parts of what was happening in America. And so part of this journey was to see what's actually happening in America since I've been gone for so long. And that kind of ties into what I experienced with Bitcoin meetups is that not only just what everything that happens on Twitter, but the Bitcoin attitude on Twitter can get pretty feisty. People are arguing, there's a lot of petty behavior, there's a lot of dooming about what's happening in the world. And overwhelmingly, what I found at Bitcoin meetups is people do not act like that in person. I met some of the same people that doom on Twitter, but in person, their attitudes are much more optimistic and much more productive. People are thinking about what can we do to build a better future, and overwhelmingly, Bitcoin meetup organizers, are thinking about what do we do to bring people together to talk about Bitcoin, to share information, to educate new people on how wallets work or nodes or mining. How do we make this a bigger and bigger movement and really uplift the community rather than dooming about everything that the WEF is planning to do to make us live in a pod and eat bugs and all of this, which whether that's true or not, has no bearing on it. But just I found that the in-person culture is much more warm and inviting and ambitious than the online culture. And I really enjoyed that. And I think I met a couple Bitcoiners at least on the trip that expressed to me like Bitcoin meetups are nothing like what you find online. And if you only interact with Bitcoin culture online, you get a very biased perspective on what it's like. When you go to a meetup in person, then you really understand, oh, this is what people are striving to do. And it's a much more hopeful and uplifting picture.
Yeah, there's something to be said about breaking bread or toasting a beer with somebody, and the common denominator or the common language, if you will, is Bitcoin. So you kind of lose the keyboard commando or telephone tough guy, in terms of one way. You like that? Um,
Yeah.
the In terms of just one way communication, and mind you, like all of us are human, right? We get I get pissed off about a number of different things. Sometimes, you spout off in 140 characters or whatever it is now, 280 characters, and it's a one-way conversation. And then also these social platforms drive somewhat or incentivize somewhat of that type of communication as well, because then you get a bunch of likes or you get more engagement and then a bunch of replies and so on. And now I've hosted, helped start the Nashville Bitcoin meetup here, and it's been one of the most rewarding experiences. So I completely agree with you. Some of the folks here in Nashville that I've met, from older folks to high school students to all different types of cultures, it's been absolutely amazing. And I'll ask this, which is, I think we maybe slightly disagree on this, but or maybe it's more of a point of clarification from the podcast, but I am pretty adamant about keeping the Bitcoin meetups to be focused on Bitcoin, the capital B, the monetary network, and then Bitcoin, the lowercase b, the asset, rather than inviting um, the topics that are like crypto, altcoins, NFTs, LFTs, uh, whatever you name it. Having it specific to Bitcoin and not having anything that's confusing, because undoubtedly, when you say the word Bitcoin, fear, uncertainty, and doubt creep in. So what I try to do, especially at these meetups and workshops hosted here at Bitcoin Park, is to create an environment where people can learn about Bitcoin, the capital B, and Bitcoin, the lowercase b. Whereas I think in your experience, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you may have seen it slightly differently, where they're maybe open to having those discussions so that they're kind of goal or idea is to bring in more people, which I think we share the same goal. It's just the execution is slightly different.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I went to any Bitcoin meetups that were inviting to like topics that were not the two, Bitcoin the monetary network or Bitcoin the asset. What I found is that there's a spectrum of Bitcoin meetups from it's an attitude towards you know people who are talking about shitcoins basically or
Mhm.
who might want to talk about it. It's like and different attitudes when someone brings up, oh well, what about Ethereum? Some meetups and some meetup organizers are just like, okay, you can leave now. Like that's not what we're talking about. If you want to talk about that, you got to leave. And other meetup organizers are like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's go through why you think that's interesting, what is interesting about it. They're more accepting to having the conversations, but that doesn't mean that the focus of the meetup is ever
Got it.
about, you know, some Web3 thing or some NFT thing or whatever. There are meetups out there, I'm sure, that are labeled as Bitcoin meetups that talk about that. But I tried to be very careful when I was picking meetups to try and avoid those. Because I remember in 2017, I would go to Bitcoin meetups and no one talked about Bitcoin, even though it said like New York City Bitcoin meetup and
Yep.
had nothing to do with Bitcoin. So I purposely tried to avoid that because I'm not interested in those conversations. And I think I was lucky that I and never ran into a meetup that was organized around that. I certainly ran into people at meetups who were like, "Oh, but what do you think about this random token that I'm really into?" And then
Yep.
you have the 5 minute conversation, you leave, you get out of that one. But yeah, I never found that it was like overwhelmingly the focus of a meetup that I was at.
Yeah, and I wouldn't go as far as to say, like, get out and leave, right? And by the way, all of us, should know the differences between Bitcoin and any other centralized protocol or other in general. You don't need to know the ins and outs of every other protocol design or shitcoin or ICO token, but we should understand the benefits and the features of Bitcoin, the monetary network, as well as Bitcoin, the asset, and explain that as clearly as you can. With that said, I always find it there's only a finite amount of time. And as the organizer or as the host, take a lot of pride and responsibility in figuring out the best agenda and topics to maximize for the audience in person, right? And so that's why I do say, there are a lot I mean, if you go on meetup.com, I mean, that's why it's like a little I cannot wait, and by the way, for anyone who's listening here, if you are a developer and want to build a meetup.com competitor built on Bitcoin or Lightning, I will fund you. Build it. You can actually come to Bitcoin Park. I'll give you like a 2 week or 3 week, like, place to work. I want to see that built. With that said, meetup.com, similar to YouTube, similar to any of these podcasting apps, they have the network effects where they can bring in other people to your meetup. So it's like you got to kind of just use them for the time being. I say all that because there are those meetups, and I do say, hey, if you're into those things, which you should be curious, do your own research. That's just a different meetup, if you will, and go and explore there. Which I do think some people come and enjoy, like our Bitcoin focused meetup, and they do go explore those other meetups as if it was anything else. By the way, there was another point in the conversation which I thought was really interesting, which you said, and again, by the way, fact check me. Most of the conversations you were having at these Bitcoin meetups were not even about Bitcoin. Like, can you expand on that?
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of the conversations were kind of tangential to Bitcoin, people talking about things like self sovereignty, um, things like growing your own food, building
Mhm.
businesses, building income streams, not necessarily solely focused on Bitcoin. Or people were talking about like infrastructure around Bitcoin, like how to run a node effectively or set up a node or wallets or home mining was a big one. People talking about mining and how to get good power rates, how to set up for airflow and all sorts of different things around home mining. A lot of people sharing. knowledge about that, especially in states where they had really cheap power. I found a lot of people were talking about mining, but it wasn't like people come together and talk about the philosophy of Bitcoin. We certainly had those conversations. Seldom did we talk about price or markets. I mean, my entire trip, the Bitcoin market was going down. The Bitcoin exchange rate for the US dollar was going down, and people did not seem to care.
Mhm.
There was very little conversation about, are we at the bottom, or what's the trade? Like, no one was just
Isn't that wild, by
focused
the way?
on buying more. It is, yeah, it is. I mean, for me, it seems like the people who come to Bitcoin meetups, Bitcoin is a savings account for them. They're not
Mhm.
trying to trade it. They just want to buy a little bit and hold it. And if that's buying, if that's saving 5% of their salary every month, then that's it. For some people, it's a lot more. For some people, they live completely on Bitcoin. But no matter what percentage it is for an individual, people do not really seem interested in talking about where the price is going, whether it's up or down or sideways. People just want to accumulate and live their lives, pretty much.
Yeah, and you just nailed a word that I'm gonna start using instead. So, like, when people are like, "You should buy it this amount every week or every day or every month," I'm gonna say, "How much, you should save." By the way, not financial advice, even though I own the domain notfinancialadvice.com, but I digress. Um, I save how much do you save a week in Bitcoin is a lot more apropos than, like, how much are you buying or your dollar cost averaging in.
Hmm.
How much of your, time are you saving in Bitcoin? How much of your earned income are you then saving in Bitcoin? I think that is a right way to frame it because if someone asks me, "How do you explain Bitcoin in one sentence?" Well, I say, Bitcoin, the monetary network, the capital B, I'll save that. But Bitcoin, the lowercase b, which I assume is what you're asking, is the greatest investable asset to preserve my future purchasing power. Um, and that's what I do. And that's like also AKA called saving. So
Hmm.
when you're traveling around, you probably met so many different knowledge levels of Bitcoin and you ride in the Bitcoin bike, probably a lot of noobs came up to you. Like, how did you explain Bitcoin to those folks?
Yeah, I mean, for each person, it really differs. And as the ride went on, I kind of became less enthusiastic about just talking to people about Bitcoin. Let me tell
Mhm.
you everything about Bitcoin because people generally don't want to hear it unless they're really curious and they ask their own questions. They don't want to hear you preach about whatever you're interested in because they have their own lives, they have their own concerns, their own interests. So typically when I would have a conversation with someone who's not interested or not knowledgeable about Bitcoin, someone who's not coming to meetups or whatever, I would just start with like, what is their life? What are they interested in? What do they do for a living? What do they struggle with? And try to connect that to, what I see as problems in the financial system that are causing a lot of problems that spill over to people's daily lives, to their jobs, to their finances, and all these things, and try to get them interested in understanding like where's the root of that problem, where's the root of the problem that your grocery prices go up faster than your income, those kind of things, and try to connect that back to money and then to Bitcoin. And I had a little bit of success with that. I think I also learned this just takes time. Like, I kind of had this dream at the beginning of the ride, like I'm going to be riding this motorcycle all around the country, and I'm going to rock up to a restaurant, people are going to look at the bike and go, oh, you're here, you're doing some Bitcoin thing. Like, tell me about Bitcoin. And then I'm going to have a 5 minute conversation with them, and they're going to be signed up on Swan and DCAing. And it just doesn't work like that. Like, people need repeat exposure. They need multiple people who they trust to talk to them about it, to understand, especially after 2017 happened. And now everyone knows what Bitcoin is, everyone's heard of it. But the only preconceptions they have about it are what they hear on mainstream media, which is 99% negative. So you have to break those down. And being just a random guy that showed up on a motorcycle, most people are like, dude, you're just trying to scam me and
Yep.
go to the next town. it's difficult to kind of push past that. So I tried to start with, let me build trust, let me get an email. And I would tell people, like, text me, email me, whatever question you have. I'm here. If you have any interest beyond this conversation and what's going on here, just shoot it to me, because they see the bike, they see me, they know, like, I clearly know something about this because I'm riding a motorcycle sponsored around the country talking about it. So they're like, okay, yeah, I'll keep your email. And if I have a question, and I've had a couple back and forths with a few people answering questions. And I think everyone's gonna go at their own pace based on their own experiences and come to an understanding of what Bitcoin is and how it might help them.
That's why I think Bitcoin meetup organizers are some of the best people in the world, right? Like
Hmm.
what incentive, buddy, do you have to even offer up your email to say, "Hey, if you have any questions, I'm here for you as a resource," to literally randos across the US? I mean, who does that besides me, you, and Bitcoin meetup organizers?
Yeah.
Like, why do we do that?
Well, Bitcoiners do it. I mean, most people I met at meetups do that regularly, more than I do, I think. I, it's just, and I think it's that kind of, people kind of pick up on that, okay, they start to trust you more when they're like, here's an email, you can see that I'm responding. You can see that I actually am interested in just giving you information. I'm not trying to sell you something. I don't send them an affiliate link right off the bat and say,
Yep.
just sign up for this thing and you'll get rich. I just want you to have the resources that I had. And if you want to pick up on them, then you will. If you don't, that's fine. Like, you come to it at your own speed. But I think that kind of approach is just very disarming. And people slowly start to realize, okay, maybe they're not trying to scam me. I'm not getting scammed here. It's not a pressure situation where I just want to quit and ignore them.
Yeah, so it's funny, my evolution, I actually was like, "Okay, wow, I love Bitcoin. How do I accumulate more Bitcoin? Oh, well, I love all these products. Let me go get all of their affiliate links and set up the site, notfinancialadvice.com, and just shill, shill, shill." And I was like, "Oh, I'll win," in the sense that I'm helping onboard people to Bitcoin, but also I'm making money, which, mind you, don't give that go do that because, if that's your passion. But there was that point where, and I think you just touched on it, which was like, hey, there's an affiliate link or like some sort of shill. And maybe I was just doing it too early. Where I was like, you know what? I'm taking all the affiliate stuff off. This is what I do. This is how I do it, why I do it. And, when you're ready, by the way, because I do think Bitcoin, as I touched on, is like, when you say the word, there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt that creeps in. And it is a journey because it's so complex. And Bitcoin can mean something different to almost anyone in the world. And it can mean the same thing, by the way, to everybody in the world in the sense of preserving your future purchasing power. But I say all that because it's just whatever tools they use and go on their own research and down their own path, they'll be able to figure out on their own. So it's just, and the other cool thing, and I'm curious to know from your end, which is kind of a question out there from the times, like, back in 2017, I think you touched on, like, Lightning was, basically almost command line-ish. I think Blue Wallet may have been early on around that time, maybe yeah, and maybe Wall of Satoshi, but, um, what tools or was there a tool or a product when you were, driving around that you hadn't messed around with or played around with that caught your eye?
Yeah, I would say there's two. One would be Moon Wallet. I'd heard of Moon, but I had never used it.
With
And
2
I'm
U's, by the way.
two
Moon.
U M U U N. Yeah. I heard, honestly, when I first heard Moon Wallet, I'm like, this is a scam because it's moon and, like, Bitcoin goes to the moon. And then I just kept hearing about it over and over again from people I trusted. So I thought, I'll take a look at it. And once I downloaded it and started playing with it, I realized this is what we need to get normal people to just accept a little bit of Bitcoin. And what I really like about it is every other wallet starts with the seed phrase and the setup.
Mhm.
And it's this clunky thing that is very important. And if you screw it up, you can really screw up your holdings. And yeah, if you're getting $10 in Bitcoin and someone steals your seed phrase, not the end of the world. But if $10 is not that much to you, but in any case, it's still this whole process, and people don't want that. They just want to see, how does it work? They want to use it immediately. People are very instant gratification,
Mhm.
especially with an app on your phone. And Moon still allows you to get the seed phrase to learn more about how to take hold of your self custody of your Bitcoin, but they do it in reverse. So you get Moon, you open it up, you can receive Bitcoin immediately. Then you can get the backup to your email, and then you can get the seed phrase. So I would tell people, like, I just gave you Bitcoin, but if you lose your phone, it's gone. You need to go through the steps in the app to get some backup for that. And then they understand the gravity of those seed words, and they've seen that magic of scanning the QR code and boom, it appears on their app.
Yep.
And I would do that a lot with like bartenders, especially. I found that like waiters, waitresses, bartenders with tipping was a really easy way
Hmm.
to show them Bitcoin, because to try to pay in Bitcoin becomes this big conversation of, well, I don't know if my boss will take it. I don't know if our payment system can take it. That like usually fell apart unless I'm talking to the business owner. But for a tip, I would say, look, I'll give you double what I would have tipped if you just download Moon Wallet and I'll send it to you. And then you go down this rabbit hole and people are like, whoa, how did that work? You scanned a QR code and now I have this thing in my phone. And then they get curious about it. And then I would tell them, here's some podcasts, some readings, and they can start to go down the rabbit hole. But they've had that like aha moment of seeing digital money transmit from
Hmm.
one phone to another instantly without any central party. It's like kind of a mind blowing experience to see that happen.
Totally. And then sometimes I oftentimes recommend Moon as well. And I'll say, "Hey, did you enter your driver's license?" And they're like, "What are you talking? No." I'm like, "Okay. Did you enter a email address?" They're like,
Mm,
"No." They're like, "Okay. What information did you enter?" And they're like, "What do you mean? You told me to download this app." I'm like, "Okay. So you downloaded the app and now you have money in that app, right?" He's like, "Yeah, $1 of Bitcoin." I'm like, and I'll either do a send if they're at Bitcoin Park, we'll buy like a cup of coffee or a LaCroix or something like that through the IBEX Bitcoin payment terminal. And they're like, wait a minute, I just used it. Now I got this Bitcoin and now I just used it to buy a cup of coffee. Wait a minute, I thought that was the meme or the joke that you can't buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin.
mm.
And bringing that experience to life has been so dang cool. Um, so I appreciate that. And by the way, you mentioned resources. So you after you kind of talked to him, you said podcasts and some literature. I am curious because I asked this. I don't know if we touched on this in the podcast, but what resources did you find, or what resources do you recommend to folks?
So I've been sharing like parts of the Swan canon. Swan Bitcoin has this like canon,
Mm-hmm.
CANON. They have these different like tracks basically where you can go learn about Bitcoin mining or nodes or whatever, some area of Bitcoin that's interesting, Bitcoin and finance, and they have one that's forget who put it together. It's like maybe Tomer or Guy Swan, but it's like 8 different podcasts. That's an intro to Bitcoin. It's like 9 hours worth of podcast content. But I talked to a surprising amount of people who listen to podcasts and like podcasts. So I would send them just that canon. Like, here's 9 podcasts. This will give you an introduction. Just queue them all up and listen to them when you have time.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that to be a nice resource to share around. I'm also personally a big book person, so I will recommend like Bitcoin Standard if people like reading books. I also, it's not a Bitcoin book, and Bitcoiners hate him now, but uh, Anti-Fragile by Nassim
Yep.
Taleb,
Totally.
I think is just a very foundational book that has nothing to do with Bitcoin, but screams Bitcoin versus the traditional financial system. It's so interesting. So I like that book. Um, Everything by Alex Gladstein, I really
Yes.
like. I think because he connects Bitcoin to the real world and to real problems that either people are personally experiencing or they can see. It's not just abstractions or Roman history about money or something. It's real things that you can see in the news, and he connects it to financial system and Bitcoin, which I think, especially in the circles that I grew up in, like liberal circles, people love that kind of thing. Like they're very interested and
Hmm.
they care a lot about that thing. So to connect that back to the financial system connected to Bitcoin really clicks.
Yeah, and if you're not following Gladstein on Twitter, Gladstein, Alex Gladstein, I highly recommend it. I think Alex will be at Bitcoin Park here in September as well, so it's going to be awesome catching up with him, and we'll be doing some creating some
Nice.
content together as well. I think your guys are going to overlap, by the way, Sid.
Yes. I never met him in person.
Oh,
That'd be
really?
awesome.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Just a little sneak peek. By the way, if there are any meetup organizers that are listening to this in this room or listening to this podcast recording, once we post it on the Builders in Bitcoin podcast feed, please shoot me a DM. In the next couple weeks, we're going to be doing a pretty cool thing, and potentially like to invite you. And if it's not this year, definitely next. Man, I'm so like, the more the meetups, the better. More the Bitcoin focused podcasts, the better. It's just the getting people to meet in person and shaking someone's hand. You mentioned something earlier today, people you trusted.
Mm,
I find that to be actually very important, especially with something as complex as Bitcoin, where yeah, I agree with you. Whatever, like the 9 podcasts, read the Bitcoin Standard, blah, 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 but it still doesn't do it the same as the dynamic personal questions someone may have around Bitcoin,
mm.
where they need a Sid or they need an Alex Gladstein or they need a Big Kite to sit down with them and say, wait, how does Lightning actually work? Like, how did that transaction actually work? Or why does a Bitcoin transaction on
Hmm.
the blockchain take 10 minutes? What is mempool? Or we can go down that rabbit hole. But I've found, and I'm curious to your thoughts as well. So starting out on, and I think you touched on this at the beginning of this recording, which is if you just confine yourself to social media or Bitcoin Twitter, you may not get as much signal as you'd like. And you may go down, you may develop trusted relationships with folks and not be the best, if you will. And I've found at the meetups in person, those have been the best to form trusted relationships to learn more about Bitcoin. So I'm curious to know your thoughts around best practices to figure out your trusted, or I call it circle of influence.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know if I have any wisdom to share on finding a circle of influence. I would just say like time and honesty. Just you pick up on who's who's honest, who's there, who's got the right read on things, and who doesn't. And it just takes time to build. I will say, like I really underestimated before this trip the power of learning in person, and I think I and a lot of people who are into Bitcoin now because of the size of the community, it was difficult to learn about it from other people. Like I didn't learn about it mostly by talking to other people. I learned about it by Googling those kind of questions that you
Hmm.
just brought up. How does mempool work? And how does a transaction send? I Google those things and read about it. But there are a lot of people out there that don't want to learn like that or aren't like, that's not how they prefer to learn. They want to sit down with someone and ask those questions. And it can be a lot more, I mean, even I find it can be a lot more effective for certain questions to sit down and talk to someone about it, even if they're not a total expert, just to be able to bounce around questions. And with an article, you know, you can't, when you don't understand something, you can't ask for clarification,
Hmm.
or you can, but you have to wait and hope that they come back to you about it. But on Twitter and especially in person, you can sit down and, you know, talk to them and get those answers. And in person, you can look them in the eyes. And I think that's really important for trust. And for a lot of people who, I found a lot of people who grew up before the internet, they want to look at someone and see, like, are you screwing me over? Because they don't know the person behind that article, whether they're part of a network of people that's trying to scam them around this Bitcoin
Mhm.
thing. But if they sit down at a meetup and there's a bunch of people there and they can sit and have a drink and talk about their lives and talk about what they share and then ask questions about Bitcoin and get real answers, that's really powerful. I've seen a lot of people at Bitcoin meetups are like, being here has made me understand this a lot better because I'm not the kind of person who listens to 10 podcasts and I'm like, all right, I'm ready. I want to buy it. I'm interested in it. People really want to have that personal connection to understand something like this.
Yep. So I think you did what, 103 days, if I remember correctly, over 30 meetups. Is that round numbers? Or are those
That sounds
specific
about
numbers
right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
um, Another question, well, for the folks that are listening, and I touched on this on the podcast, which was if you're thinking of starting a meetup, do it. Even if it's you by yourself, get the meetup page, post it out, heck, tag me, BITKITE on Twitter. That's BitKite. Tag yourself. What's your Twitter handle, Sid?
Captain Sid, SIDDH. Yeah,
Yeah.
tag me too.
Tag Odell, tag us. I love retweeting, and also following different meetup organizers from around the U.S. as well as the world. And why I say this, it's really, and I'm going to ask you this as well. Over the 30 meetups that you've attended, for me at least, the ones that have been the most impactful for me are the ones that are about smaller, where maybe 10 to 15, 20 folks that I may have been able to develop relationships with. And then, of course, like the 100, 200 person meetups have been fan freaking tastic as well. I just had to spend more time, and which was great to spend more time. But I'm curious, in your travels, for someone who's listening that wants to start a meetup, what has been whether it's a bar or a restaurant, or how to reach out to someone, any best practices that you want to share with this group?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say if you want to start a meetup, every meetup that I came into contact with, they started very small. So don't I met a lot of meetup organizers that they had a small meetup and they're kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, your turnout wasn't that great because they only have like 5 or 10 people. And there's kind of this trepidation, like if you don't have a big meetup, it's not worth doing. But every single meetup starts with a tiny group of people and slowly grows. And the best meetups I went to were the ones where it wasn't forced. Like they were 5, 10, 15, 25, 40 people
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, but you could tell that the organizer, and when I talked to the organizer, they didn't throw flyers all around. They didn't buy ads to try and get people to come to their meetup. They just told people, like, we're going to be here once a month, invite your friends, get people to come. As an organizer, I think you need to definitely be open to approaching new people when you see a new person at the meetup who's kind of like, what is this? I'm curious. Sit down with them, learn about them, answer their questions, make sure they feel welcomed. Because if you don't, they're probably just going to leave and they're not going to come back because they're not going to feel like they were welcome there. They're not, just the same you think about if you went to a random event and no one said hi to you and you
Yep.
had one short conversation, you're probably never going to go back to that event. So be welcoming to people. One other thing I would say is like make sure there's a core group that will come regularly. Like you said,
Great
start it
point.
alone. I would say don't try to start a meetup alone because if it's just you, I've heard from several meetup organizers who started failed meetups before they had, the one that I attended, that they would get one person or two people every week or every meetup, and they'd have a conversation with them and then they'd leave. And I think there's this perception that the meetup is just this one guy. So people don't come back to that. But if you have 2 or 3 people in a meetup who are coming every week, then it's easier for more people to glom onto that. And then when you get a fourth person, you can have 2 separate conversations. And you get a pair, now you can have more and more conversations. And it can grow a lot easier. When it's just one person, it's more difficult to stay regular. Plus, you have accountability then. If you have 2 or 3 people, you're
Totally.
accountable to those other organizers or early members to be there regularly. And I would say, like, same time, same place with a regular schedule works really well, because then it's very predictable for people.
Totally. So quick recap, because I think you nailed a bunch of best practices, which I found to be worthwhile. One is pick a date and a frequency that you're going to just commit to. And I would say commit to at least 6 months. So, for example, in Nashville, we did the second Wednesday of every month, and we committed to that. And we did that. I hosted it for 10 months or so, from the second one to the 10th one. And it was awesome. Like, it was just awesome. The other one is, yeah, I agree. If definitely get a group of people, because you'll be surprised when you have that first one and you start talking about like what we want to make this, whether it's a. And by the way, another point would be, um, what's the type of vibe that you want to have? There's like the one spectrum is a bit dev Socratic seminar. Um, and then the other one is just a pure social meetup, right? Like, and by the way, both are great. Just committing to which one you want to do. And then I agree with the point around starting it with somebody, because the accountability factor is huge, and you'll be surprised after that first one, you'll find like a good core group of 4 to 5 folks. I bet, depending on where you live and how big of a population there is. But you'll be surprised by the folks that come out of the woodwork. Some of my now really good friends are from that first meetup we hosted back in August of 21, which is awesome. But long story short, do it. That's for dang sure.
Yeah. One other thing I'll say is connect with other meetup organizers, like whether that's in your region or
Mhm.
just around the country. Like you said earlier, Rod, tag all of us tag Odell, tag Big Kite, tag Captain Sid on Twitter, tweet it out. We'll help you connect with other local Bitcoiners and meetup organizers, because they will also help you with ideas. They'll help you with when you like, oh, I haven't had people show up for 3 weeks in a row or whatever it is.
Mhm.
They will help you uh, much more than I think I can. I haven't started a meetup. I've just been to a lot of them, but they'll be able to help you troubleshoot those things, help you with ideas. And I found that there's a lot of networks of meetups that are popping up. Like the Bay Area has a network, so they have their North Bay, South Bay, East Bay, San Francisco meetups, but they all talk to each other.
Mhm.
And same with Southern California. They have a bunch of meetups, but they talk to each other a lot. The Midwest has a Telegram group of people that go to meetups and meetup organizers, and they talk about regional stuff, or like, I'm going for work from one state to the other. Is there a Bitcoin meetup there? So you'll get a lot more chatter and conversation and interest in what you're doing as well, and you'll get to learn about what other people are doing as well. So yeah, just reach out to me on Twitter if you're curious about the specifics of any of those. Like, I'm in the Midwest Telegram group and close with the Bay Area folks and all those. So
Awesome.
there's a lot of that happening now.
So, buddy, this has been fantastic. Maybe we can have time for a question or two if there's anyone that wants to raise their hand in the audience. Um, I gotta jump here in a few minutes. Unfortunately, I'm actually in well, two things. One, I gotta get home. That's like number one important. But the second thing is I'm getting trash talked right now. I just poked my head into. I'm in. You play fantasy football at all?
I do not.
Yeah, you're probably too cool and too hip for that. Um, but it's I'm in this Sats Bowl league with Gladstein, Parker, Lewis,
Nice.
and Ryan Gentry, Alex Thorne, and some of these other guys, and they're talking. I just looked over, and they're all talking smack about me specifically, and I'm like, "What the heck did I do?" So I got to
Wow.
commit some time to go and respond to them. Let me
The
see if
important things.
yeah, the important thing. All right, let me see if Psych duck, spy duck. I can do this. There you go, buddy. Let me see if that worked. There you go, buddy.
Nice. You gotta unmute though.
Yeah.
We cannot
Okay, there we
help you
go.
with that.
Trying to figure this out. I haven't used this before. Sid, I just had a question regarding Thailand. How is Bitcoin adoption going over there? Have you been able to orange pill any people over there?
Great question.
Yeah, so that's where I live full time. We're in Southeast Asia, and it's interesting. So in Thailand, there's like a further. It's just a difference in culture from America. Like in America, people look at Bitcoin as an investment product, and in Thailand, like there's not very much investing activity. Like very few people are buying stocks or really actively investing. When it comes to Bitcoin, there's a lot of people who are interested in just trading crypto and getting rich, and not very much interest or understanding in Bitcoin. I think a lot of it is a language barrier as well. Thai is a very, very different language, not only from how it looks and sounds, but this grammatical structure. It's not easy to just translate into Thai, and it's not a very large language. I mean, there's something like 70 million people in Thailand, but I don't really see often like translations of Bitcoin content in Thai. So I think there's a big education gap for sure in Thailand. One thing I will say is I think they understand like not trusting the state with anything really, because Thailand's government has always been kind of tenuous. There's not a very trusting relationship between government and people, so they are under no illusion that the government works for them or that the monetary system works for them. And I think they would benefit from Bitcoin a lot. There's just big education and knowledge gaps.
That's great. And just a quick reminder, by the way, that was a great, concise question. We'll do maybe one or two more. And we are recording this, and we're going to be posting it on the Builders and Bitcoin podcast feed. So if you don't want to be heard, don't post a question. Let me see if I can bring up Moxie next. There you go, Moxie.
Hey guys, how you doing today? I hope you guys can hear me okay. I'm in my car. First of all, I just want to say thank you guys for having this space. Takes a lot for people to kind of jump out of their regular routine and put something together for the people to get information. So thanks for that. My question is, how do you guys feel about major players in the game, the billionaires of the space like Kevin O'Leary and people of that caliber being bullish? Do you guys see an alliance there? Do you feel like they're just trying to get wealthy, or do you feel like they're bringing exposure to cryptocurrency and especially Bitcoin that is much needed for adaptation and regulation? How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of those people like Kevin O'Leary that you mentioned, the people who got really wealthy in the fiat system benefit from the fiat system. So they're not particularly interested in Bitcoin for why I'm interested in Bitcoin, because they make all their money and they made all their money off the fiat system. So I don't really think that they necessarily do justice to Bitcoin, in that they talk about it. Certainly a good thing. I think any press is good press, especially for Bitcoin, because people will hear about it more. They'll be more interested in it. They start to think maybe it's not a Ponzi scheme, and I should read about it and understand it better. And some of those people will really understand how it works and why it's valuable. But for the most part, I think like a lot of the really wealthy people that talk about Bitcoin are shilling their own bags. Essentially, they're fair weather fans for how it can benefit their portfolio, and they're not in it. It's not a long-term trade, I think, for a lot of these people.
Yeah, I want to reserve my comments because I don't want to get too, I don't know what the right word is, but I will say to Sid's point, which is based on the time preference, Moxie, and the games that those folks are used to, right? Regulatory capture and regulatory games playing within those worlds. Bitcoin is a totally different game where you voluntarily participate in this open monetary network. You don't even need to hold the asset, right? But you can use Bitcoin to send money or value to anyone who's got a connected device, right? So that's every single day that's growing. And I think I was listening to Roloff Botha on a podcast, and like in 99, the internet market or the internet connected devices was about like 300 million. And today we're at like, I don't know, 4.5 billion or 5 billion people have access to the internet. And eventually 8 billion are going to have access to the internet, right? I hope in the near future. And so what I like to say is, what I like to think about is, all right, in this new world, right? And if the internet was its own country, what would the currency or the store of value of this new nation state look like of 8 billion people? And in my humble opinion, the monetary network or the quote unquote Fedwire or monetary system would be Bitcoin, the capital B, and the reserve asset, which is only going to be 21 million Bitcoin, would be the lowercase Bitcoin B. And I think that's pretty dang cool that a friend in Accra, Ghana, to another friend in Paris, France, to some rando person that I don't even know in Kansas City, Missouri, to anyone in the world who wants to voluntarily participate can take their earned income or local money and convert it into savings, which is in Bitcoin. I think that's pretty dang special. So I hope that was helpful, Moxie. I appreciate the questions, the couple questions we had. Sid, I really, as always, buddy, I appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to catching up with you in a few weeks here in Nashville. I'll do a couple plugs and then I'll pass it to you to close out, which is if you're ever coming through the Nashville, Tennessee area, you shoot me a DM at Bitkite, BITKITE, or please, wherever you are in the world, join our meetup page, meetup.com/Bitcoin Park, to stay up to date on our meetups, workshops, and events. Love to see you and love to hang. So, Sid, anything else you want to leave the folks with?
Thanks, Rod. Looking forward to seeing you too. So the ride is over now. I rode like 11,000 miles around the U.S. to 30 different Bitcoin meetups over this summer, and I've concluded the ride now. That said, Swan Bitcoin, there was a couple sponsors on the ride. So Swan Bitcoin was the biggest one. Unchained Capital, Bitcoin Magazine, and Upstream Data, they all helped out with the ride. And Swan Bitcoin is working on producing a docuseries about the ride. So I did interviews with meetup organizers all over the country and a lot of B-roll footage of just life on the road in America as I was crossing the country. So look out for that. You can find on my Twitter feed, or I have the website btcmoto, moto.com. And that's just like a bunch of links right now, but you can see a teaser for that. And as new episodes come out, I'll put them on that website. So if you're interested in learning more about how that journey went and what Bitcoin looks like across America, keep an eye on that.
And None of Your Business just commented, so did the bikes sell yet?
No. So I am selling the motorcycle without the saddlebags. The saddlebags have signatures from hundreds of people all around the country. So I'm just selling the bike as a motorcycle, but it's not getting too many bites. I don't know what it is. It's a great condition motorcycle. So if you're interested in it, hit me up.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again. And thank you, everybody. Look forward to staying in touch, and we'll chat with you soon.
Thanks, Rod. Bye.
Bye.